Good evening, everyone. I am Eljean A, graduate of Master of Arts in Education, major in Mathematics. I am here to present my thesis entitled Teach One to Learn, TOTL Strategy in Addressing the Learning Gap in Operation. Many students view mathematics as one of the most difficult subjects compared to other subjects. It requires a lot of time, effort, and perseverance for someone to learn because it incorporates many different techniques for addressing problems. Students with poor mathematical understanding and skills have a lot of difficulty performing even fundamental operations. Due to its subject's complexity and wide range of teachings, it is obvious that some students are unable to comprehend even the most basic concepts. Many students enter senior high school with significant gaps in their understanding of and proficiency in mathematics, particularly regarding the fundamental operations of integers. The low performance in operations on integers has persisted despite numerous strategic interventions employed by teachers to rate students' mathematics proficiency, and in San Agustin National High School, there are grade 11 students who still lack the mastery of the basic operations on integers. Through this strategy, the students will be properly guided on how to deal with operations on integers as well as their applications, particularly in general mathematics and statistics and probability. For the conceptual framework, as shown in the figure, this study determined the difference in the control group using lecture discussion method and experimental group using TOTL strategy in terms of level of academic performance in basic operations on integers. This also determined the difference between the pre-test and post-test of the respondents under control and experimental group of it. For the research respondents, 60 grade 11 students of San Agustin National High School enrolled for the school year 2022-2023. For the research instrument, a 40 research-made test was utilized in this study to find the answer to the statement of the problem. And for the statistical treatment of data, we use frequency and percentage distribution and t-test for independent and dependent sample. For the presentation of the results and the discussion of the data, let's first have the first question: what is the level of performance of participants in the context that the participants find difficulties when answering questions related to operations on integers? This indicates that they do not fully understand the concept of integers. Then frequency and percentage distribution on the level of performance of participants in the control group in operations on integers during post-test. All mean score 29.30 of the participants was described as satisfactory. The finding conforms to the study of Dikdikan as cited by Maranan 2015, which found that students' performance lies on the expertise of a teacher, his or her effectiveness to attain the objectives of the lesson, willingness to provide varied learning activities for interactive learning, and the initiative to ask questions that develop critical thinking skills. The teacher has to foster creativity and critical thinking among students. To do this, he or she has to use problems with multiple solutions or that require investigation and discovery. Also, he should prepare activities that will lead to answer with a pattern in which the students could generalize. Number 2 question: what is the level of performance of participants in the experimental group on operations on integers in terms of pre-test and post-test? The result implies that the participants find difficulties when answering questions related to operations on integers. This indicates that they did not fully understand the concepts of integers. For the post-test performance of the participants in the experimental group on operations, the overall mean score 27.10 of the participant was described as fairly satisfactory. The result implies that the participants who engage in peer tutoring demonstrate significant performance in answering questions related to operations on integers. This indicates that they approach learning the concepts almost equally when taught using the lecture discussion method facilitated by the teacher. Number 3 question: is there a significant difference between the pre-test and post-test performance of the participants in the control group using lecture method discussion? So as you can see in the table, the computed value of 44.336 exceeded the critical value of negative 2.042 at 0.05 level of significance. Thus, the null hypothesis is rejected. Therefore, there is a significant difference between the pre-test and post-test performance of the participant in the control group using the lecture discussion method facilitated by the teacher. This implies that the grade 11 participants who engage in the lecture discussion method facilitated by the teacher demonstrate incomparable performance in dealing with operations on integers. This connotes that teacher-led discussion is really effective when teaching the concepts of operations on integers. Question number 4: is there a significant difference between the pre-test and post-test performance of the participants in the experimental group using TOTL strategy? As you can see in the table, the computed t-value of negative 28.354 exceeded the critical value of negative 2.042 at 0.05 level of significance. Thus, the null hypothesis is rejected. Therefore, there is significant difference between the pre-test and post-test performance of the participants in the experimental group using Teach 1 to Learn strategy. The result implies that grade 11 participants perform better in dealing with operations on integers when they are assisted by their peers in understanding the concepts. This indicates that the difficulties encountered by the students in the concept were being addressed and worked out together with their peer. This further prompts the participants to perform better in the learning activity. For question number 5, is there a significant difference between the performances of participants of the control and experimental group in the pre-test and post-test using lecture discussion method and Teach 1 to Learn strategy? As gleaned from the figure, the computed t-value of 0.464 failed to exceed the critical value of 2.002 using 58 degrees of freedom at 0.05 level of significance. Therefore, failed to reject the null hypothesis. Thus, there is no significant difference on the pre-test performance of the participants in the control and experimental group. Since the student participants for both the control and experimental group were predetermined based on the results of diagnostic tests, the finding entails that the participant demonstrates similar performance when answering questions related to operations on integers before the application of the lecture discussion method and Teach 1 to Learn strategy. This shows that they have poor knowledge and understanding on operations on integers. Shown in Table 12 is the result of the t-test of difference between the post-test scores of the participants from the control group and experimental group. As depicted from the table, the computed t-value of 2.201 exceeded the critical value of 2.002 using 58 degrees of freedom at 0.05 level of significance. Therefore, the null hypothesis is rejected. Thus, there is a significant difference on the post-test performance of the participants in the control and experimental group. Although it can be inferred from the results that lecture discussion method which was facilitated by the teacher is effective, the student participants who engaged in Teach 1 to Learn strategy showed significant improvements in dealing with questions related to operations on integers. It can also be noted that participants under control experimental group provided an almost proximate result after the application of the two methods. For the conclusions, the participants demonstrate low level of performance in the pre-test and high level on the post-test in relation to the application of lecture discussion method facilitated by the teacher. This implies that before the use of the teaching approach, the participants had difficulties in answering questions related to operations on integers, and they provided significant result after the application of the teaching approach. For the number 2, the participants demonstrate low level of performance in the pre-test and high level on the post-test in relation to the application of the Teach 1 to Learn strategy. This implies that before the use of the strategy, the participants had difficulties in answering questions related to operations on integers, and after the application of the strategy, they provided significant results. For the number 3 conclusion, the participants using lecture discussion method shows incomparable performance when dealing with operations on integers. This is attributed to the fact that the performance of the students depend heavily on the instructional approach employed by the teacher in teaching up on integers. For the fourth one, the participants using the Teach 1 to Learn strategy demonstrate a better performance in answering questions related to operations on integers. The result of the post-test after operations for this strategy is attributed to the fact that this method greatly enhances the performance of the participants. For the fifth conclusions, the participants in the lecture discussion method and Teach 1 to Learn strategy perform equally poor in pre-test and almost equally in post-test when answering questions related to operations on integers. This entails that Teach 1 to Learn strategy can be an effective method in giving interventions as it provides a statistically significant improvement. Thank you, and that is my thesis entitled Teach 1 to Learn strategy on addressing the learning gap and operations on integers.